Hello, chickens. I just want to say before I begin getting onto the subject for the video that I named the file for the video just before I started filming it, and I wrote self acceptance, and when I looked up, I'd actually missed out the first letter and it said elf acceptance, which I thought was appropriately festive. And that's just a little useless bit of information for you. I'd like to talk a little bit about self acceptance because I think on the spiritual journey, certainly, but also on the journey into self development and, feeling comfortable with your own emotions and comfortable with progressing beyond sort of the 101 stuff with spirituality, self acceptance is paramount. And there are a lot of people that talk about individuation and the importance of making your peace with the shadow aspect. And I'm one of those people. I really believe in working with the shadow aspect and seeing yourself as an integrated whole, looking beyond the ego, looking at what's there 100%, all of it, not just the parts that you're comfortable with, not just the parts that you wish to present to the world, but the whole animal, if you like. I think self acceptance is paramount for that kind of thing, and I think often there can be a blockage with spiritual growth if there's a lack of self acceptance. And if you have a lack of self acceptance in your life, you'll probably know it. I think it's rather an intuitive, strongly held feeling inside. If somebody was to ask you, oh, do you accept yourself, are you comfortable with who you are, you will instantly kind of feel no with every fibre and particle of your being. If you don't accept yourself, you'll know about it. It's not something that you'll need to be told by a shrink. It's something you probably wouldn't be able to help but make peace with, because it's such a strong feeling and it's such a burden on the soul, in my opinion, to have a lack of self-acceptance. I think it's something that's soul destroying and something that can really hold you back on many different levels, but particularly with regard to the spiritual journey. I've just been thinking about a few things recently to do with self-acceptance, because I myself a few days ago got into a bit of a situation where I spoke my mind about something that had hurt me, and afterwards I was kind of upset with myself for doing it, and I wished I'd just kind of put my feelings in a box, because I thought it caused a little bit too much of a difficulty between my friend and I, and it ended in rather a long discussion, and she felt hurt because she felt that I'd insinuated that she wasn't being a good friend to me, when in reality I just wanted to express my opinion on this one thing that had happened. I won't go into the ins and outs of it, but it ended with me feeling a real lack of self acceptance. I felt that by doing that, by voicing my opinion and by causing a little bit of a ruckus for a moment, I'd actually displayed a part of me that's quite unattractive, a part of me that's bolshy, a part of me that talks before thinking it through, and a part of me that will be kind of quite mean spirited if I'm not included, or I don't know, I just felt it showed a bad side of me and I couldn't really let it go. And I knew deep down that it was just a little situation, and these things happen, and we did manage to sort it out, and I explained that I didn't mean it in the way she thought I meant it, but it really hit me deeply, and it made me think a lot about my relationship with my sense of self-acceptance and whether or not it needs to perhaps be reassessed or challenged, because sometimes when I do something or say something, I don't just let it pass. I look at it as a part of my being which is coming out that's quite unattractive. But I think that's why I do the shadow work, and that's why I think that kind of thing caters to my own spiritual journey, because self acceptance is something that you have to keep coming and making your peace with at times when you feel a little bit of dissociation from it, a little bit of detachment from it. You may need to kind of check in with your sense of self acceptance, but I do think it's very important to have some. A lack of self acceptance can stem from many things. For a lot of people, it stems from childhood, from their parents not having the capacity to love them to the extent that they needed to be loved, or their parents pushing expectations onto them, that kind of thing. You could have come from a household which was obsessed with perfection or competition, and you may have always felt you fell short. Perhaps one of your parents was absent and didn't take much interest in you. But it doesn't always have to stem from childhood. I think a lot of the time when we're older and we start making our own way in the world, there are times when a disappointment really pulls the rug out from under us, or we really felt that we were on the right track with something, and then it turned out that we really didn't understand the situation at all, and it ended up hurting us terribly. I think that's a big jolt, a big shock to the system, and I think that self acceptance kind of goes the way of the dodo for a little while after that, while we cower, in a way, I suppose you could say, from what's actually happened, or refuse to accept accountability for it or feel that it 100% proves that we're a loser. I think things like that can happen in adult life that can be just as traumatic in a sense as a prolonged lack of love or lack of praise and feedback during childhood. So I don't necessarily think it always has to be about childhood, but when looking for the root cause of a lack of self acceptance, it would probably be wise to start off there. And then eventually, as you get further down the timeline in your own life, you will recognise the factors that have brought that lack of self acceptance to the fore and left kind of a bit of a void there. And I think that after you've accepted what the root causes are for your lack of self acceptance, and I think that's important to do, the next stage on the journey is really the most difficult one, and it's the moment where you accept that you are about to embark on a journey of healing. Getting self acceptance does not come overnight. And that's one of the most painful things about it. It is a long, drawn out journey from feeling a sense of self loathing or a sense of alienation from your core being or a sense that nothing you do is any good and you wish you could be somebody else, all these symptoms of a severe lack of self acceptance. Once you get to that stage where you realise that's not healthy and you want to do something about it, you need to also accept that there's no magic bottle of stuff you can go and get from the chemist. It's going to require a healing journey. And that journey will be long and arduous and at times desperately challenging. So I think that's a difficult thing to accept, obviously, first of all. And then beginning on your journey of healing, forgiveness is obviously a very important tool. Forgiveness of others who may have contributed to our sense of lack of self-worth or self-acceptance, but also forgiving ourselves for being unable to accept our whole being and unable to move forward in some way because we are held back by that lack of acceptance. Forgiving yourself is a very important part of the early stages, I feel, of the journey, and it's something that if you lose touch with your self-acceptance, you'll need to come back to again and forgive yourself again for losing touch with it, and for not trusting in yourself and for not having faith in the fact that you are worthy of whatever it is you want to obtain. And the next thing you need to do really is to find the inner critic and kill it. Kill it dead. Because it's a nasty little piece of work and it does a lot of its work with great subtlety and it's very difficult to pinpoint. He's a very difficult little sucker to pin down. He's slippery. But the inner critic works by way of just picking you apart. And in a sense, the inner critic is not an outside force. Maybe I shouldn't use a metaphor because, of course, you are your critic. And if you're harming yourself by criticizing yourself or berating yourself instead of encouraging and empowering yourself, then you need to own that. You need to have some accountability for that, of course. But the way I see it is just as an analogy of, like, for example, when I write, I always talk about having to kill the inner editor. I just imagine him as a really stern guy sitting on a chair, and I imagine him looking at my novel and marking it with red paper, just absolutely destroying it, just putting corrections and criticism all over it. And when I get into that stage where I'm writing and I get out of the flow and I start looking at everything and thinking, this is crap, you can do better, where is this coming from? It's full of cliches, it's a parody of itself. That's where the inner editor needs to be found and shot in the back of the head, because he is really harshing my mellow. And that's a big part of being unable to get in touch with a sense of self-acceptance, is that you have an inner critic or an inner bully, and that's the part of yourself that won't let you move forward and won't allow you to move on. And that little part of yourself needs to be dealt with imminently, because it's really holding you back, of course. And I think once you've accepted that part of you that's bullying your core being, you can distance yourself from that part of you. And it's difficult to do, especially since we put so much weight behind the negative all the time. It seems so much easier to question the positive stuff than it does to question the negative. And it's almost become a little bit of a cultural trend these days, to question anything that's happy and go lucky. And the idea that you're naive if you believe in smiles and hugs and love and accepting yourself, it seems as though people present it as trite or corny, and that being critical to the point of overt negative skepticism is kind of the one. It means that you understand more about love, life and the universe. But in fact it doesn't. It just means that you're probably quite miserable a lot of the time, and you're probably pushing that misery onto others too. I think that it's great to have a little bit of a boxing match with your inner critic, because your inner critic is the reason that you're not able to move on as a whole person. Self-acceptance is about accepting the whole you, and that's why shadow work plays such an incredible part in self-acceptance for a lot of people, because it is about dragging that crap out from underneath, forgiving yourself for what you've been unable to look at in yourself, forgiving yourself for believing that some aspects of your shadow made you into a bad person or made you unworthy of the company of others whom you felt to be superior, that kind of thing. Those moments of forgiveness and healing, and then those moments of telling your inner critic to do one, those moments are so valuable when it comes to self-love. And I really feel like, it's important that when I'm speaking to friends who I feel are really suffering with a lack of self-acceptance, that I talk about the inner critic, because I think that it's something that can put them in touch with this idea that a part of themselves is attacking another part of themselves, and that needs to stop. It's self-sabotage, really. My mother always put it like that with me, and I've always hung on to that idea. And the other thing about the inner bully is that the inner bully says things to you that you'd never say to your friend. That part of you, that horrible little, vicious little twisted archetype, I guess, of the inner bully that you nurture and you feed, is telling you things that you would never say to somebody that you loved. The things that you say to yourself, you would never ever say to your best friend. You'd never say to the people you loved most in the world. If you think for a second about some of the cruel and unnecessary things you say to yourself, things about your appearance, things about your abilities, things about your absolute foundation sense of worthiness as a human being, we're very, very vicious with ourselves. We think things about ourselves and say things to ourselves that are completely unnecessary and over the line. If you are going to embrace self-acceptance as a whole being, then you need to accept that self-acceptance has absolutely no place for this idea of bullying yourself. It just doesn't go anywhere good. And every time you say to yourself, I'm fat and ugly and disgusting, or I haven't worked hard enough and therefore I'm lazy and grotesque and nobody will ever love me or see any worth in me, I don't deserve that job, I don't deserve that life because I haven't done enough to warrant it, or I'm not as good as her and I wish I could be her. These things, you are bullying yourself. And would you find it acceptable to bully a friend or bully an acquaintance or bully somebody you didn't know? You probably refrain from doing that kind of thing at all costs, and yet you do it to yourself. And self-acceptance is about being your own best friend. If you're bullying yourself and taking the piss out of yourself, mocking yourself, telling yourself in any way that you don't deserve to go forward as you want to in your life, then you are not your own friend. And no person that is an enemy of themselves is going to experience self-acceptance and everything that self-acceptance has to offer. It's not going to happen. So I think looking in the mirror and just throwing a sly, vicious comment past yourself, berating yourself, when you catch yourself doing that, think very seriously about how important it really is to you to experience self-acceptance and to prolong that and sustain it and understand that it's valuable and nurturing. Because if you're bullying yourself, then you're not going to be able to get there. You accept your friend for what she is, what he is. You love that person. You feel compassionate towards them. You accept their flaws as well as their attributes. Do that to yourself, and I promise you that half the battle is won when it comes to self-acceptance, and it really is. Another aspect of self-acceptance that I find so important is intuition. Its value, your connection with it, because when you trust your intuition and you can tap into your intuition and you know when it's talking to you, you trust yourself. If you can go with your intuition, then it means that you trust yourself. And a big part of self-acceptance, for me certainly, is trust. When I don't trust my own actions and behaviours, when I don't trust my own gut instincts, then I'm going against something about myself which is fundamental, which is part of my core being. And I will talk in another video about ways that you can really tap into your intuition. But really, a lot of people think the word intuition is an abstract concept, and I can understand why they might think like that, of course. But I think when you boil it down, if you've ever had any experience of just getting that gut instinct, that feeling that something is not right, or that feeling that one direction is definitely more beneficial than the other, even though you can't see the end point of either direction, you just know. And that's the thing that I'd say is so paramount about intuition. You could read 100 thick books about intuition and about how to incorporate it into your life. But really, I think the bottom line with intuition is that it's the point of just knowing. just knowing that something is the right or wrong choice. Just knowing despite what other people say, just knowing to the point where even though somebody may be warning you against a certain course of action, you feel comfortable, calm, right in your choice. Intuition is a beautiful thing and it will never ever steer you wrong. I truly believe that. When people say my intuition was wrong, I don't think of it like that. I think of it as that I thought I was trusting my intuition, but actually I was listening to something else, which was governed by ego or governed by fear. My intuition, that word to me means something pure. The intuition is your inner sat nav for life. And I think that that can never ever steer you wrong. If you really wanted to go after a certain course of action and then it turned out to be very, very damaging to you, then either your intuition steered you towards it because there was a lesson there which is going to strengthen and nourish you, or you felt you were tapping into your intuition but you were confused and you were tapping into something else, or your intuition was blended with something a little bit less nurturing that took you down the wrong tunnel. Intuition is your friend and always will be your friend. It is your inner sat nav, and if you can find a way to follow it and find a way not to be afraid of that, then you trust yourself, and that is the greatest gift, and that's a key way to get towards self-acceptance. Accountability comes with trusting yourself too. Trusting yourself is not just about blaming somebody else if it all goes wrong. Accountability and responsibility for your actions, I feel, ties into the idea of trust. And once you trust yourself, and once you have fortified and strengthened yourself by knowing that you can make the right choice for you because it comes from deep down inside, then you are ready to go on to the next stage, which is standing up for your rights, standing up for your needs, voicing your needs, expressing what you want, expressing what you desire. A great many people that don't have any self-acceptance or can't accept their whole integrated being are very, very nervous about their rights, about the idea that they deserve anything. There's a sense of worthlessness there. That inner bully is berating them, and in turn they feel that they can't fight for what's right for them. They can't get a little bit of space for themselves, because they don't have the right to. They're not worthy of it. They're a tiny little person and they shouldn't have the right to decide that somebody's walking all over them, or they shouldn't have the right to decide that they want to move on to another area of life and that this isn't working for them anymore. People with a lack of self-acceptance stay in horrible situations for bloody years because they don't have that sense that they are entitled. They are entitled to live their life in a way which brings them contentment and satisfaction and joy. They're entitled to pleasure. They're entitled to hedonism. They're entitled to enjoy the five senses and the earthly realm. They're entitled to laugh, belly laugh, deep down laugh. People who accept themselves will accept who they are when they're having fun, and who they are when they're being content and when they feel right with themselves. And at that moment comes a sense of self-respect, and self-respect is absolutely integral to the plot. When you get to that point in your life where you know that you are allowed to be happy and that you are allowed to say, you're standing in my way, with respect to you, I have respect for myself, get out of my way. When you know that you're allowed that little plot of land for yourself, which is your life, then you know that self-acceptance has come. And I think after that, when you've built yourself up to that level of strength, you can come to the final stage, which is so important, which is the ability to comfort yourself, to love yourself, to be kind to yourself and compassionate to yourself. This is the total opposite of the inner critic, the total opposite to that little bully that lives deep down within you. This is almost like having a nurturing mother inside you who is going to pick you up when you need it, who's going to encourage you, who's going to motivate you onto the next stage. I think that self-love is really just that. It is an absolute verb. You are loving yourself. You are doing right by yourself. And it's only once you understand that you are entitled to expect a certain quality of life, and that you are entitled to go after your goals and your ambitions. It's only once you have that inner core within you that you'll be able to comfort yourself when you do fall down. You'll be able to help yourself when you do feel disappointed. If you failed at something, if you didn't do as well as you expected at something that you were after, then you'll know that because you had the right to go after that in the first place, you also have the right to comfort yourself if it all turns to shit. You have the right to put a blanket around yourself, give yourself some time, replan the strategy, and then relax, refuel, and then go after what you want with renewed vigour and with fresh skills and with a fresh understanding of what's needed. These are just some thoughts on self-acceptance and why I think that it's so important, not only for the spiritual journey, but in every aspect of life. Thanks for listening.